the key in our case is that with the colemanite, there's a ready market for it as is without any sort of significant upgrade necessary, number one. And number two, the world is full of colemanite consumers that are actively interested in and would welcome and are searching for an alternative supplier to the one global supplier that exists. So we really believe that our inroads into the marketplace is not going to be that difficult.
So welcome and thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm sitting down with Tim Daniels, President and CEO of Erin Ventures. Tim, it's your second time on your show. You joined us earlier last year at PAC, but my first time getting to interview you. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Jonathan. Thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to this.
And I understand you're joining us from Italy, so I guess I should be saying good evening or buonasera even more appropriately.
It is indeed evening. It's dark outside already, but most of my life revolves around the North American time zones, and so this is still the middle of my workday.
There you go. So are you have a little espresso or cappuccino on the go then, or?
No, I have my big old cup of actually water this time of night.
Okay.
I've done my espressos for the day, but I am addicted to them, that's for sure.
There you go. Well, I will say for the record, Tim, you look about 200 pounds lighter than I would in your place living in Italy. I love Italian food, so I hope you're taking advantage. But in all seriousness, let's talk about Erin Ventures.
Sure.
I think a good place to start. I know we did the quick interview at PDAC, but for those maybe watching this for the first time, maybe a quick overview of the company. What is it? What is Erin Ventures in the business of doing?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. As I said earlier, Erin Ventures is an exploration and development company. For the last several years, we've been focused on the development, first the exploration, and now we've turned the corner recently into the start of the development phase of a Boron project located in Serbia.
Okay. And I think this is going to, you brought it up in the previous interview we did in March, so I think it's appropriate to do it again. What are the main uses for boron? Because I know it's not gold, it's not copper, it's not nickel. It's kind of more of an obscure element. So let's
you're
talk
right.
about the boron market.
It's ironic because most of your viewers out there probably know very little about boron, even though it touches their life every day. For example, the computer screen I'm looking into right now, the glass on that computer screen is about 12% boron, the same with the screen on your smartphone. The ceramic tiles that cover your floor, what gives the ceramic tile the strength and the glossiness is the boron that goes into the glaze. The walls of your house have fiberglass insulation more than likely. That fiberglass requires boron. If you live in a high-rise building with the architectural glass on the outside, same thing, that glass has a high percentage of boron in it to give it its strength. And in fact, the boron touches our lives in ways we don't even think about. It's in our pharmaceutical products. It's a necessary micronutrient in the soil, and most of the global crops are deficient in boron. And the addition of the boron to the fertilizers greatly enhances the crops. The latest generation of battery technology relies on a significant amount of boron in it, and the battery is better in every way. It's cheaper to manufacture, it lasts longer, it holds a higher charge, it's more environmentally friendly, and so on and so forth. Nuclear power containment. Boron is an essential element that's used in the heavy water that's used to cool down and contain the radioactivity in a nuclear reactor. Stealth fighter technology. Most people don't realize that stealth fighter jets are no longer made out of metal. They're made out of this ceramic material. And again, what gives the ceramic its strength and heat resistance and so on is the boron in it. And so, boron runs the gambit from everything from the mundane, low tech, like your laundry detergent that has boric acid in it, up through to the tiles on the outside of the space shuttle that's used as the heat shield, and everything in between. And so there's literally hundreds upon hundreds of varied uses for boron globally that make boron an essential critical element in modern life today.
Okay. Well, I mean, that was a really good explanation of obviously the uses, and I'm sure many people, including myself, that's probably new information for. I want to get a sense for the supply and the demand. I did take a look through your investor deck. There's a lot of information in there, but I did find that, a number of sort of the charts on demand growth and such are sort of based on older data. I'm going to guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's probably in an obscure market for something like boron, it's probably not as easy to get, supply and demand forecasts like you would for, say, copper. Is that fair?
You're dead on the money there. The problem, which is also one of the opportunities that presents itself to us in this marketplace, is that it's very much an oligopoly. There's two dominant players in the boron industry, one being Rio Tinto with their boron deposit in California, and the second and largest is actually a company that's owned by the Turkish government called Eti. And between the two of them, they control about 80% of the global market. And neither of them are real anxious to share any sort of meaningful, up-to-date data with respect to their operations, because frankly, they don't need to, and there's no strategic reason for them to. And for that reason, it's difficult to really access any sort of meaningful current data. There are several publications that try to stay current. The Bible in the boron industry is Roskill, and Roskill publishes a boron publication about once every 5 years. But unfortunately, most of the data found in their publication, which they're able to gather up from resources like Rio Tinto and Eti, tends to be, a few years old. And so for the lay person who's just trying to get their head around the boron market and to do their own independent due diligence on the boron industry is a real challenge. There also is there's no comparables out there. In other words, there are no other junior companies who are developing boron deposits so that you're able to quickly draw up a comparative chart between us and the half dozen other junior companies who are in our space. They just don't exist, and the reason why they don't exist is because there is just not very many economic boron deposits in the world. It's that simple. It comes down to that.
So despite the lack of good data, is what is available out there, does it sort of indicate that the demand is growing steadily and that the demand is kind of outstripping whatever supply currently exists? Is that fair?
Clearly. There's, again, some of the intel that we've been able to gather up has shown that the industry has reached an interesting tipping point within the last year or so, where for the first time probably ever, demand was outstripping the ability of the companies in the marketplace to keep up on the supply side. And of course, anytime you have that sort of scenario, you expect to see prices rise. Rio Tinto has, in their own reports, admittedly indicated that over about the next 5 or so years, they're expecting there to be additional demand for borites globally that will necessitate the need for additional supply that are equivalent to about 1.5 times more than what they're currently producing in California, which is the biggest single boron operation in the world. So, so clearly, Rio Tinto is anticipating, significant growth in boron demand over the next, half dozen or so years.
And are there any complexities to this, to the supply and demand side? So, for example, using nickel, there's lots of nickel producers in the world, but for example, on EV batteries, there's only certain forms of nickel that are really well suited for that. Sure. When it comes to boron, the Rio Tinto deposit in California or the Eti Maden deposit in Turkey, do they produce different forms of boron? Like how do those forms take form?
Sure. There's generally 3 categories of types of borites. There's the sodium borites, and that's what you find throughout the Americas. Rio Tinto's deposit in California is almost exclusively the sodium-based borites. And there's a small handful of producers out of South America that kind of backfill the balance of the market that that Rio and Eti aren't able to supply. And their deposits are very similar to that from Rio Tinto. So they tend to be the sodium borites. Over in Turkey, on the other hand, you have the calcium borites. And those two markets are quite different if you're talking about sale of the raw goods or upgraded materials. Once the borites are further processed into things like boric acid, then they're much more homogenized, and it doesn't matter whether the source came from calcium borites or the sodium borites. And that's where the vast majority of the supply out of the Americas goes towards is for use in boric acid production. Whereas the supply out of Turkey has some additional users that the sodium borites don't. In that the glass industries, all the various types of glasses that I mentioned earlier, whether it be fiberglass, whether it be the borosilicate glass that you find on high impact screens like your telephone and computer and so on, whether it be ceramic glazes, that segment of the industry can't use the sodium borites because the sodium in the borite actually weakens the glass, so it works counter to the whole reason why you're adding the borites to the glass. And so for the glass producers, if they're going to rely on feedstock that is based on the raw material as opposed to a finished product, and of course they like to do that because it's cheaper for them, they only have one supply line globally, which is Turkey. Mm-hmm. And that's an issue. Now, if a user is looking for boric acid, there's a number of producers, yes, both Rio Tinto and Turkey and the handful of producers out of South America, but there's also a handful of Asian-based third-party producers as well. So if you're looking for finished borite derivatives like boric acid, there's a number of different global producers that you can access. And so it's much more of a homogenized marketplace. and competes based on price. But for the vast market that's out there who's looking for the calcium-based borites today, they only have one supply line, and that's Turkey, until we came along, because our deposit is also primarily calcium-based borites as well.
Okay.
And so that is our immediate low-hanging fruit entryway into the marketplace. When we have conversations, and we've had many of these over the last few years with potential off-takers who traditionally have relied solely on the Turks because that's the only supplier for them. And we say that we have an alternative supply of colemanite. Nobody says that they're not interested. It's not a comfortable or secure business model to rely on one supply line only.
Yeah,
and that's the nature of the industry today. So the industry, while it's a small oligopoly when you're talking the overall boron market, that small oligopoly is yet subdivided into the suppliers on the sodium side versus the single supplier on the calcium side.
So, and just for the record, when you mentioned colemanite earlier, that's just the boron-based mineral that you would potentially be mining at your deposit, right?
That's right. Yeah,
that's the calcium borate.
Exactly. It's a calcium borate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that gives everybody a good picture of the boron market. Obviously, there's some challenges here, certainly around the data side. But on the flip side of that, when you get sort of these obscure industries or industries that not a lot of people know about, I think that's where you get your asymmetry, your potential asymmetrical upside. So that's interesting. So let's pivot a bit to specifically your company.
Sure.
You do have a deposit. It's correct me if I'm wrong, it's in Serbia. The name,
Correct.
and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, is Piskanja. Let's talk about the deposit, where it's located, what's the infrastructure like. Is Serbia a good place to be doing business? Let's discuss those things.
Sure. When I was scouting throughout various parts of Eastern and Central Europe some years back, looking for some mining opportunities, and came across Serbia, I was immediately intrigued by it for several reasons. One is that Serbia has a long, rich history of mining. Operations like the R2B Bor copper conglomerate within Serbia is certainly one of the biggest and oldest copper operations in Europe, and that's one of many long-standing large venerable mining projects that have existed in Serbia for many decades. So I knew that Serbia had this rich mining history. Also, Serbia, unlike other parts of Eastern and Central Europe, when it was part of Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia and Serbia always were non-aligned, and so again, unlike other parts of Eastern and Central Europe, where they still had a lot of the I'll say hangover from the old communist days, Serbia was always very much open for business with the Western world. They never had a closed border, even through their days as a unified Yugoslavia and as a quote unquote socialist country. They were non-aligned. They weren't a part of the Soviet system, and workers were free to come and go from Serbia, and so they had as much knowledge and as close ties to Western Europe as they did to Eastern Europe. And so we knew right away that we were in a jurisdiction that was much more readily accessible to Western companies, but also very well developed infrastructure in Serbia in general. And one of the things that specifically attracted me to this particular deposit when we had first come across it was that it is located in a well-known mining district in southeast Serbia, about 250 kilometers south of Belgrade. So there's a divided highway that runs about 90% of the way to the property. The last 10% is accessible also by all-season paved roads right onto the property. Additionally, we have power lines that crisscross the property. We have a water source, a river that's within a few hundred meters of the property. Maybe most importantly, there's a rail spur, also about 300 meters from the property. And that rail line gives us direct access to seaports and river ports. So it's about 250 kilometer straight shot rail line up into Belgrade. And Belgrade is on the Danube River, and there's a major shipping port. So we have rail and water access right up into the heart of Europe. Or alternatively, the rail also runs south and either through deepwater seaports in Montenegro or Croatia that gives us access to the world market. So, but at the same time that all this infrastructure was in place, the valley that our deposit is located in is a historic mining district, and the 1,000 or so villagers that live in that area either work for some of the other mining companies located in that region, or they operate subsistence farms, and that's it. And so one of the attractions for us to this project was that we knew that of the money that would go into the development side, literally there was no money that would have to go into the infrastructure side, because it's all there in place right now. And additionally, as I mentioned, it's historically a mining district. There's been mining operations that have operated continuously there for the last 150 years, and to this day still continue. And so the region very much depends on mining for a living, and everyone who lives in the area either works for one of the mining companies or has an uncle or a brother or nephew or someone who works for the mining companies. And they know that that's a big part of their livelihood. So we have very much the support of the local communities.
Supportive communities and access to the skilled labor that you need to actually operate the mine.
And that's the other point. One of the other mining operations in our immediate vicinity, located about 2.5 kilometers away from us, is a coal mine that's owned by a government crown corporation. And that coal mine has outlived its useful lifespan, actually several years back. But the government continues to keep it open and operating more as a social program than anything else, because the several hundred miners who work at that deposit have nowhere else to go. And so the government is very anxious to see us get our deposit up and running, so that they can do an orderly shutdown of their coal operation, and we can port over as many of those skilled mine workers as we need to our operation. So yeah, not only do we have all the infrastructure that we need in place and the support of the local community, we have skilled, underemployed, underpaid workforce on our doorstep.
Okay. So good infrastructure, good, labor force and community support, all pretty key for a mining operation. I want to move on to the deposit economics itself. I know that you did a preliminary economic assessment back in 2014, I believe it was, and I have those results here that I can, or the highlights, I guess, that I can bring up on the screen. I mean, these are really pretty impressive numbers. 64% IRR. I mean, these are an attractive number. Obviously, I look at that NPV value, 430 million approximately. Of which your company now owns half, and we'll get into that later. But obviously, your company's trading at pennies on the dollar to this valuation right now.
Yeah, beyond a doubt, and that's obviously been a source of frustration for us for quite some time. And I've often said that if we had numbers as robust as these are, but we were a gold deal instead of an obscure boron deal that people really couldn't get their heads around, we would have been trading at many times the sort of market cap we've had for the last several years. But that's one of the challenges of being a specialized industrial mineral. But as you said, these numbers are incredibly robust. A couple of things I'd like to point out. This PEA was authored by SRK out of Wales. And they were extremely conservative. These numbers, believe it or not, were probably their third or fourth draft after they continued to cut our revenues back, increase our capex and operating numbers, and still the numbers came out this robust. It's very much a cash cow, which is exactly the reason why companies in the business like Rio Tinto aren't in a big rush to share with the world what their deposits are throwing off as a percentage of their overall operation.
Right,
they're tremendous cash cows for them.
All right, so let's talk about next steps then, or what steps are required to put this deposit into production. Looking through your slide deck, and maybe I can bring that slide up.
Okay.
This was kind of the certification of resource was given as the big next milestone. That was expected last year, I believe, in August or September. And obviously, you weren't able to get that done. I suspect that had probably a little bit to do with the the virus situation, the worldwide health crisis. Is that fair?
It is fair. Yeah. I estimate that it put us off target by about 6 months, give or take. Serbia, like most countries in the world, went through a series of lockdowns, shutdowns. And as I said, that put us off our projected targets by about 6 months. So, as we were expecting the first stage of the certification process to be completed by about the fall of 2020. Now we're expecting it before the end of the first quarter of this year. So
okay. So, I mean, that's a near-term catalyst, I guess, that people could look forward to. Are you able to quickly explain the certification of resource? Is there any, this is obviously the Serbian process, but what sort of, is there any analogy to what, North American investors might understand?
Completely. From where we are today through to our final license for a mining operation, there's 3 steps in the process. The first one is the certification of the resource or reserve. And to get that certification from the government, we have to generate a Serbian qualified geological elaborate. which is just another way of saying a PEA. So exactly the documentation that we generated vis-a-vis SRK in 2014. We need to generate a Serbian compliant version of that again as the first step in the licensing process. So there's two basic pieces to that, just as there is to a PEA. There's a resource calculation and a preliminary economic valuation of the economics of the deposit itself. Just as a PEA has, that's what we're expected to do again for the certification of the resource.
So one question I would have on this, if you're putting this together for the government, the Serbian government, would the company be able to reissue the PEA? Would this step sort of produce a certified version that you could share, compliant to 43101 standards, or would you have to sort of commission that separately, kind of concurrently with this? And would you do that?
So the report that's generated is to Serbian standard, and while all the data in it, of course, is completely relevant to generating an updated PEA, the document itself is not formatted in a 43101 format. So all that data can then, in fact, be reconfigured, reformatted to fit into an updated PEA, if we desire to do so. And so that's something that we've discussed internally. And if we see the benefit to doing so, we absolutely will do that.
Okay, so I brought up the next slide here. This would be the next step in the process following the certification of your resource, and expected in Q1. This looks like it's talking about a feasibility study. Again, just for those looking and not familiar with the Serbian process, is a feasibility study in this process equivalent to a 43101 compliant feasibility study? No.
It would be roughly the equivalent of our pre-feasibility study. So okay. It's a little more in depth than a PEA, but not as detailed and onerous as a full-blown feasibility study. We've allowed a 12-month period between the certification of the resource to the exploitation license. We don't believe it'll take us 12 months to generate that report, but we've allowed for that. So because we've pushed the date for the certification resource to sometime around the end of the first quarter of this year, we're anticipating about the first quarter of 2022 for our exploitation license phase to be complete.
Okay. And then just, going into the third phase, mine construction approval, from a timeline standpoint, is that another year from? Yeah,
the third step in the process, the one thing I forgot to mention in the second step is that along with their Serbian compliant feasibility study, we have to do an environmental baseline study. So those are the two main components. The end result of that second phase is we're actually granted the exploitation license itself. Then we move into the third and final stage of the licensing process, which is the blueprinting of the mining operation itself. So putting together all the final design and blueprint work for the actual mine design and surface footprint infrastructure as well. And again, we're anticipating, we're allowing anyway about 1 year in between those two events, even though we anticipate that it'll take less than a year to generate all that.
Okay. Well, I think that gives everyone, a nice overview of the process and what's left. It sounds like at least, very shortly that, you will have some news to discuss with respect to, expected completion of the first step. I wanted to switch gears for a second. You did announce a pretty big news release in about mid-late December that you had, brought on a partner, Temas, to help you develop the deposit and bring it to, a potential mine. So let's talk about that a little bit. What would the key benefits be to Erin Ventures, and why did you do the deal with this particular company?
Okay. We've been in the process of looking for a potential strategic partner for quite some time. We've known that the reality is that it will take a significant amount of capital to build out the mine, and it's capital that we'll have to source. And if one were to ask me over the last couple of years, what is the biggest single risk left in the project, it is that financing risk. What ultimately would that financing cost us, and would we be able to secure it? We've been in dialogue with a number of potential strategic partners, some that are industry-based, and I'm talking about boron industry-based, some that were mining-based, some which are just pure financiers. And with each one of those, you run into a fairly steep learning curve. For example, the boron-related companies, maybe, let's say boric acid producers that might have an interest in aligning with us. They understand the boron side of the business, obviously, once the product is out of the ground, but they don't understand what is involved with the development of a mine. And so for those types of partners, the mine development side was a fairly steep learning curve. The alternative was true for, let's say, mining companies, where they could very quickly get their head around our deposit and the economics of the deposit. But when it came to understanding the boron market and how we would penetrate that market, that was a very big challenge for them, and would give them reason to pause. And so it was always that sort of scenario where a number of potential partners were interested, but we're always waiting on the sidelines for the next development. And finally, we were fortunate enough to find Temas, or actually they found us. They were actively searching through Serbia, looking at various projects, as I had done some years earlier, believing that Serbia was an interesting marketplace to try to find some projects to work on, and they stumbled across us, and end of the story is that we're like-minded in terms of our desire to see this as a going concern mining operation, as opposed to some financial companies that all they were interested in is if they financed us, it was how could they get out in a couple of years, making 5 times their money, and had no interest in the long-term viability of a mining operation. It was a quick flip for them. Temas is not in that category. They're looking at this as a long-term strategy for them, and how they get involved to develop the project and stay involved over the long haul, and that's how they envision maximizing a return for their shareholders. The other thing that was really important to us, and they were like-minded, was that our funding needs going forward, and our requests in terms of the tranches that Temas would be putting forth, would match up with our needs on the ground going forward in terms of completing the various stages of the licensing process, along with the equity component that we would need for the mine development. And the other piece that they bring to the puzzle, which is, again, very, very important, is through some of their associate backers and companies, they have access to the debt financing that's available and required to complete the mine construction, to complete the CapEx needs on the debt side, and their financier groups are willing to put up as much as 80% on the debt side. And we've always believed that the more debt that we can take on to develop the mine, the better, because as you saw in some of the earlier slides, the payout on the CapEx is about 15 months. So the more we can debt finance, the better, clearly. And so the combination of them being willing and able to put up the equity funds needed to complete mine development, in conjunction with having the relationships with the bankers who will put up the debt financing, relieves us of any further obligation from this point forward through until it's a going concern mining operation. And that made it a very attractive scenario for us.
Yeah, and obviously, I think especially those connections on the debt side of things, having that sort of taken care of, or mostly taken care of, that's a huge benefit to this relationship. So it was for 10.5 million euros. They get 50% of the deposit. So just for clarification, with respect to the 3-step process that we already discussed, how much of that 10.5 million would be required to get you to the end of that 3-step process to the point where you're ready to start building?
Sure. Approximately 3 million all in, 3 million euros gets us through to, to the exploitation completion stage, exploitation license completion stage, and then about 7.5 million of equity, new equity, would go into the CapEx for mine development.
Okay. I think you've hinted at it or in earlier in the interview, Tim, but have you had any other partnership discussions, whether for on the financing side or any offtake agreements? You mentioned there were some purely financial groups that would be interested. Yeah. Like I would be curious for this part of the world, because there would be interest in just development as a whole. And in Serbia, do you get any sort of international funding organizations interested?
Absolutely is the short answer. From all walks of life, some purely funding organizations, some off-takers that are interested, some that are just pure off-takers looking for a secure alternative supply line, so that they're not completely dependent on one global supplier. But other off-takers who are more than interested in discussions revolving around vertically integrating their operation to secure their supply line, for the next couple of decades. Some of them are boron derivative companies involved with things like the production of boric acid and fiberglass and so on. Yes, we've had all those at our table, and they continue to be interested in partnering with us. And so going forward, our relationship with Temas doesn't preclude us and Temas jointly bringing in yet other outside strategic partners as it makes sense to do so that add more value to the partnership. So we will continue to look in those directions and have those discussions as they make sense. And I think with the addition of Temas, we now will be able to get beyond some of the fundamental milestones that some of these potential partners were looking for before they were interested in pulling the trigger with getting into the next layer of dialogue with us on a potential partnership.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't like to be first into the fray. They're happy to find somebody else that decides to be first, and then they'll follow along, but they don't want to be a player at the table.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So let's pivot a bit to the stock and the capital market side. So as an investor, if you're looking at Erin Ventures, how if someone asks you, how am I going to make money from this play? How long if I invest today, how long am I going to have to hold to make money? Sure. Is the goal of the company truly to bring this into production, or is a buyout a potential? And I think the answer is always yes on a buyout, and it just kind of depends on the price. But how would you answer that question?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. I'm a great believer that only a fool would say no to a proposal that they haven't heard yet. And so, are we open to a buyout? Absolutely, we would sit down and hear the proposal. I think that one thing that could certainly catalyze a potential buyer coming to the table in a serious way that hasn't happened before is our partnership with Temas coming through to fruition, and us, collectively getting over that finish line where we complete, the mine licensing process. We complete the feasibility studies and so on, and I think that will put us into a fundamentally different light with some of the potential buyers out there who certainly have been looking at us in the past, and that's one scenario. Another very real scenario that we are happy to enter into, extremely happy to enter into, is take the project through to fruition and operate it as a going concern mining operation. One nice thing about our deposit, as I mentioned earlier, it's a colemanite deposit primarily, and colemanite has a ready market as a raw material. A good percentage of our deposit, and when I say good percentage, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 75% of our deposit is of high enough grade material straight out of the ground that it's of sales grade as is. So literally all we need to do is bring it up out of the ground, crush it, bag it, and it's sold FOB mine site. And that's our low hanging fruit. So we know that we have internally today, and that's only been, that strength has been, redoubled with the addition of Temas's technical people, and they've got some good technical people. We know we have the ability to develop into a going concern mine. Our concern was always, what do we do with the product once it's on the ground? With any industrial mineral, the easy part is exploiting the deposit, but developing market share can be the challenge. But as I just mentioned, the key in our case is that with the colemanite, there's a ready market for it as is, without any sort of significant upgrade necessary, number one. And number two, the world is full of colemanite consumers that are actively interested in and would welcome and are searching for an alternative supplier to the one global supplier that exists. So we really believe that our inroads into the marketplace is not going to be that difficult. And so if it makes sense for our new strategic partnership with Temas to take the deposit into production and continue on as a going concern mining operation, we're happy to do that. Again, you saw the sort of numbers that are projected to be, generated from this deposit, and that's not a bad thing to live with long term. If that's the scenario that we're faced with, is keeping it as a going concern mining operation. But I think even in the shorter term, I think well before we're a going concern mining operation, I would expect that finally the market is going to take some awareness of who we are and finally give us, the sort of fundamental value that we would have had already if, as I said earlier, if we were a mining play or a copper play or whatever, a gold play or a copper play, or some other, base metal that the marketplace understands as opposed to, a more exotic industrial mineral like boron.
So I want to talk share structure. I believe as of today, you're sitting around 120 million-ish, fully diluted, probably closer to 200 million.
Right.
When you did your interview with Brandon at PDAC, you mentioned about 50% of the shares between the management group and about 40 key shareholders. So the 40 key shareholders plus management, that accounts for about 50% of the shares. You did a number of capital raises in 2020 since that last interview. Did all of those key shareholders or participate, or did you get a high participation from that group continuing to support the stock?
Yes, the simple answer. We've had a very dedicated, loyal core shareholding group for a number of years. There's literally been some arm's length shareholders who have been in the project as long as I have and can tell you more about the boron market than I can. They're very knowledgeable and certainly in it for the long haul. They continue to be our core shareholders through this last year and the financings that we've done, and have continued. That core group has continued to be main contributors to ongoing financings that we've done. So the demographics, or the mix of percentages and so on, I wouldn't expect that it's changed much in the last year or so. We still have a situation where amongst, let's say, the top 50 shareholders, management included, you're looking at roughly about half the issued and outstanding in that group's hands, and the other half of the stock is extremely widely distributed. We have well over 1,000 shareholders, and so outside of the core group of 50 people that hold half the stock, the other half the stock is distributed 1,000 different ways, literally.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to bring up, and again, I think it's important to address it, is, well, it's good you have Temas in now, so you don't have to do any more financings. I'm assuming are you covered for G&A going forward?
No, we are. We've got enough in the treasury at this point to sustain us, for quite some time now. So things are fine.
Okay. But I did want to talk about the warrant situation. So this is from CEDAR. This isn't up to date because, as I mentioned, you did do a few other financings since the end of September, but there is a fair amount of cheap warrants here. Sometimes this is a concern for some shareholders, I guess. What is the plan to help deal with this overhang? And when you're looking at this number, are a lot of these warrants sitting in the hands of those, say 40 or 50 key shareholders that
Yes.
would be sort of stronger hands?
Yes, absolutely. That's a big part of the key to this is that a very good percentage of these warrants are in the hands of the core group, and this group has been very dependable when it comes to always reaching into their pocket for new money. It's not been sell off shares that they own on one side to exercise the warrants on the other side. No, it's been fresh money that's come in. They continue to increase their holdings. So a good piece of the outstanding warrants are in those hands. And the other thing that we've always encouraged people to do, and for the most part, it's been the case that we say to people, look at we're here, to help you out on the market side. If you need help, if you've got a block of stock that you need to trade out of for whatever reason, whether it's to exercise warrants or you just need to liquidate, we'll work with you. And it's in both of our best interests by communicating your need to us. We can possibly find a buyer for it and help you liquidate at a better price than if you were just to come in and hit the bids yourself. Number one, and so it's better for you, but it's better for us too because we have a more orderly market, and so we've always encouraged people to do that, and it's worked out that way where people quite often will come to us and say over the next while I need to work off this many shares. Can you help find some buyers? And so we've encouraged people to not to be afraid to communicate to that to us, and we'll try to have a bid for them and get them off in a more orderly fashion. So we're hoping the same thing is if there's folks out there that are wanting to liquidate some of their free trading stock to exercise warrants, come to us and we'll work with you to do that in an orderly fashion.
Okay. Let's take a look at the share price. This is the longer term weekly view. It's obviously been a challenge. I think I can quickly before I even ask you, Tim, I can probably quickly guess some of the key challenges in order to turn the share price around is to get people to understand boron or even to be aware of it in the first place. I'm going to guess that trying to get an institutional investor in, for example, that would be wanting to do their own rather thorough due diligence. They go out in the market trying to understand boron, and they run into this issue of how can I find reliable data to justify my decision. Am I close there? Am I hot?
Yeah, for sure. In the early years, it was Serbia itself because it was a place that was filled with turmoil and had a number of regional wars that it was involved with, and its early years of democratization had some hiccups along the way, and so there was challenges when we were speaking to folks about Serbia. Ever before we mentioned the type of deposit that we had, they had heard enough when they heard that we were in Serbia. Once Serbia was no longer a challenge, and it isn't. Serbia is well on the road now to full membership within the EU, and they have normal relations with all the countries in the world. All the big mining companies have some operations in there, and companies in every other walk of life, from Fiat making the little 500s to Microsoft and so on and so forth. And so Serbia as a country is no longer an issue. But boron continues to be a challenge where, as you mentioned, institutions, they look at our numbers and they're very impressed. They're honestly, quite taken by them, and they say, the last piece of the puzzle is we've got to go away and do our own independent due diligence to verify the boron market and so on. If everything you say is correct, boy, this is a good one, and we're going to want to invest. And more often than not, we hear from them after a month or two, and they just say, yeah, you were right. It's a real challenge to get our hands on any sort of verifiable independent information on the boron industry. We'll watch for a while, and that's been a challenge, both with institutional investors, with strategic partners, with mining analysts. Everybody, kind of comes up against that same blank wall when it comes to getting their heads around the boron market. And so that has reflected itself in our share price for sure. The fact that boron, you can't press your app and find out, what boron is worth today. You can't look at how the other, half dozen or dozen, junior boron exploration companies are performing today, because they don't exist. And so, any way people turn looking to validate and verify independent of us, they kind of run up against that brick wall, and that does reflect in our share price for sure.
Yeah, and that's that double-edged sword, the boron. Again, on the one hand, you have the asymmetry, the asymmetrical upside, because you're dealing with a market that a lot of people don't understand, aren't aware of. That tends to lead to opportunities, mispricing. That's kind of the whole philosophy behind the junior markets. People are getting in these companies early before the attention on them is widely available, and before the market has really gotten a good sense of the value. Obviously, that's the same situation could apply to Erin Ventures, but again, on the flip side is there's no information to go on. So the same fundamental thing, that boron is an obscure market. It's tough to get information. It does present that upside, but it's also the hindrance. So obviously, probably a tough job for you as the president and CEO to be able to share the story and get traction. Now here, I did bring up, this is more of the recent chart, and things are starting to improve. You can see some volume coming back into the stock. Interestingly enough, when you announced your deal with Temas, there was very little market reaction. It was quite muted. And then it seemed like as soon as 2021 kicked in, you can see the increase in volume. Obviously, the price has followed that. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on? Do you think it was just a delayed reaction for people to understand?
I do. Of course, the timing was what it was. The deal came together right towards the end of last year. We obviously were obligated to release it in a timely fashion. But if you're going to pick a strategic time to release big news, it wouldn't be days before the Christmas holiday season. And so, but it was what it was. So of course we announced it and saw little reaction in the marketplace, prior to the end of the year. And sure, then come, the first few trading days in January, all of a sudden people were back from the holidays and getting serious again about looking at their investment portfolio and what news was out there on who. And all of a sudden, without there being any sort of new news beyond what we had already announced in December, things really started to pick up quite significantly, both in terms of volume and share price. So clearly, I think that just it was a delayed reaction that we saw the benefit to in January rather than in December.
And I'm sure a welcome change for you, Tim.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, well, this has been a great interview. I think maybe to end it to two questions. If someone's watching this and they want more information, they want to talk to you, can they reach out to you directly, and how would they do that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, you absolutely can. You can either reach me. I don't know if you have my email address up on the screen, but that's okay. I can certainly provide you an email address that I'm happy to field questions. You can reach me at timdaniels@earthlink.net, EARTHLINK.net. You can give our office a call, 250-384-1999 is one of the lines into the office. Our website is www.erinventures.com, and we'd love to hear from you. We're more than happy to share the story, answer questions, do what we can to make some new believers out of your viewers.
There you go. And last question, I always like asking this. We're at the start of a new year. What are you most looking forward to in 2021?
2021 is a really important year for us in that we reach the first major milestone in our licensing process, and that puts us into a completely different fundamental reality, and puts us on a defined path, both in terms of the steps and timeline that's required to take this through to a going concern mining operation. So we're really looking forward to getting into and getting through the mine licensing process. That's the big milestone for us this year, for sure.
Right on. Well, Tim, it's been great. Like I said, I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot. It's been a great learning experience for me. I will certainly be watching the stock and seeing how your results look later this quarter. And I hope, those watching the video today, feel the same. So thanks for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. Stay in touch. And until then, be well, stay safe, and drink lots of espresso.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was a real pleasure being on your show, and I'm happy to be back anytime you want me back. And you bet, I will be enjoying my espressos every morning.
There you go. All right. Take care. Cheers.
Okay. Take care. Bye now.